3 years ago, something happened to me during a night drive. At first, I thought it was just a strange coincidence. But later, I discovered something that made absolutely no sense. Because the place I found that night does not exist on any map. No records. No satellite images. Nothing. But I was there. And if you watch until the end of this story, you will understand why I never drive through that forest again. Because what I saw in that village was watching me too. But something felt wrong. But that wasn't the strangest part. I didn't understand it yet. At that moment, I felt uneasy. I should have turned back. But I kept driving. That was my first mistake. Something about that place was off. And that was only the beginning. I wish I noticed it earlier. The silence was unnatural. The forest felt different. Even the air felt heavy. But things were about to get worse. I didn't realize what it meant yet. Something was watching. I could feel it. But I ignored it. And that decision changed everything. I should have left immediately. But curiosity won. And I regret that decision. Even now, years later, I still remember that feeling. Then something happened. Something I still can't explain. At first I thought I imagined it. But then it happened again. And again. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't normal. Something was very wrong. But it was too late. I was already there. Deep in that forest. Far from the highway. Far from anyone. And that road should not exist. Not there. Not on any map. And yet, I was driving on it. And the deeper I went, the darker the forest became. Almost like the trees were closing in. Then I saw something ahead. Lights. Small lights. Coming from the distance. A village. At least that's what I thought. But something about it felt wrong. The houses looked old. Too old. Almost abandoned. But the lights were on. And that didn't make sense. Because there were no roads leading there. No signs. Nothing on the map. And yet, there it was. A village in the middle of nowhere. That should have been my warning. But I ignored it. And drove closer. Slowly. Carefully. Watching the houses. Watching the windows. Something moved behind one of them. Or maybe I imagined it. I still don't know. But the feeling was real. That feeling. That someone was watching me. Then I stepped out of the car. And everything became silent. Completely silent. No wind. No insects. No dogs. Nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. And that's when I noticed the clocks. 3 years ago, I was driving through a remote highway somewhere in northern Russia. It was late. Very late. The kind of late where the world feels empty. No cars. No lights. Just darkness. And the endless forest stretching on both sides of the road. At first, the drive felt peaceful. But something about that night felt different. Something felt wrong. I didn't understand it yet. But that feeling stayed with me. The deeper I drove into that forest, the stronger it became. The road ahead looked normal. But the forest around it felt strange. The trees were tall. Too tall. Their branches stretched over the road like dark arms. And the headlights barely reached through the fog. That was when my GPS suddenly lost signal. No warning. No message. Just silence. The map disappeared. At first I didn't think much of it. That happens sometimes in remote areas. But then something else happened. Something I still can't explain. Because right after the GPS went dark, I noticed a road sign. A wooden one. Old. Almost broken. It stood slightly tilted near the edge of the road. The letters were faded. But I could still read them. One word. Karskoy. 3 kilometers. I had never heard of that place before. And yet something about that sign felt important. Like it wasn't supposed to be there. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. And that decision changed everything. I slowed down. The road turned slightly to the right. And just beyond the trees, I saw something. A smaller road. Barely visible. Covered with dirt and leaves. Almost hidden by branches. There was no sign pointing to it. Except that old wooden marker. Karskoy. 3 kilometers. I checked the GPS again. Still nothing. Just an empty screen. That road wasn't on the map. And that should have been my warning. But instead, I turned the wheel. And drove into the forest. The road was narrow. Too narrow for a normal highway. Branches scratched against the sides of my car as I drove forward. The forest grew thicker. Darker. Almost like the trees were closing in behind me. I could feel something watching. Not see. Just feel. That strange instinct. Like when someone stands behind you in a dark room. And even though you can't see them, you know they're there. But I kept driving. Because ahead of me, through the fog, I suddenly saw lights. Small lights. Yellow. Flickering through the trees. A village. At least, that's what I thought it was. But what I discovered in that village still doesn't make sense to this day. And the deeper I went into that place, the more I realized something terrifying. That village should not exist. But before I reached those lights, something else happened. Something small, but strange. The kind of detail you don't notice immediately. At first it was just the fog. It was getting thicker. Not the normal kind of fog you see on the road. This one felt different. Heavy. like it was hanging between the trees, almost like the forest was breathing. I slowed down, because suddenly the road ahead started to disappear. The headlights could barely reach 10 meters in front of me, and that's when I noticed something that made no sense. My headlights were reflecting off something, but there was nothing in front of the car. No sign, no tree, no object, just fog. But the light kept bouncing back, almost like there was something standing there, something I couldn't see. I stopped the car, just for a second, and listened. Silence. Absolute silence. No wind. No insects. No distant highway. Nothing. Just that heavy fog pressing against the windshield. And then, something moved. Not in front of the car. Behind it. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. But the feeling stayed. That strange instinct. The one you get when someone is standing too close behind you, even if you can't see them. I should have turned around. I should have driven back to the highway. But the lights ahead were getting clearer. And curiosity is a dangerous thing. Especially at night. Especially in a place that shouldn't exist. Because the closer I drove toward those lights, the more the forest changed. The trees became thinner. The road became smoother. Almost like it was used recently. Which was strange. Because this road wasn't even on the map. And then, suddenly, the forest ended. And the village appeared. The first thing I noticed about the village was the lights. Warm yellow lights glowing in the windows. Old houses. Wooden fences. Narrow streets. The kind of village you would expect to see somewhere deep in the countryside. But something about it felt wrong immediately. There were no cars. Not a single one. No street lamps. No wires. No signs. Nothing modern at all. And yet the lights were on. Which didn't make sense. Because houses don't light themselves. Someone had to be there. But the streets were empty. Completely empty. I drove slowly through the village. Watching the windows. Watching the doors. Waiting for someone to appear. But no one did. And the silence was even worse than in the forest. Because villages are never this quiet. There are always sounds. Dogs. People. Whine through the fences. But here, nothing. Just the engine of my car echoing between the houses. And that's when I saw the first strange detail. A clock. Inside one of the houses. It was hanging on the wall next to the window. The curtains were open, so I could see it clearly. The clock showed 11:42. At first that meant nothing. But then I drove past another house. And saw another clock. Also 11:42. That made me slow down. Two clocks showing the same time could be coincidence. But then I saw a third one. And a fourth. Every single house that had a clock visible from the window showed the same time. 11:42. Exactly the same. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Because clocks don't stop together. Not like that. Not perfectly. Not in every house. And suddenly the village didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt paused. Like time had stopped. Right there. At that exact moment. 11:42. And that thought sent a chill through my spine. Because if time had stopped here, then something must have stopped it. And that was when I saw someone. A figure. Sitting on a wooden bench near the corner of the street. Perfectly still. Watching my car. Watching me. And the way he was looking at me made it clear immediately. He knew I didn't belong there. The man on the bench didn't move. Not even when my car stopped right in front of him. He just sat there. Watching. His face was calm. Almost too calm. Like he had been expecting someone to arrive. Or maybe, waiting for someone. I opened the car door slowly. The sound echoed strangely through the empty street. Still no dogs. No wind. No voices. Nothing. Just that man. Sitting there. Smoking slowly. The glow of the cigarette lighting up his face for a split second. Then darkness again. I walked a few steps closer. And the closer I got, the stranger everything felt. Because the man didn't look surprised. Not even a little. Like strangers arriving in the middle of the night was normal here. Then he finally spoke. Before I even asked anything. His voice was quiet. But clear. Tu zabludился. You got lost. I nodded slowly. And asked the simplest question I could think of. Что это за деревня? What village is this? He answered immediately. Karskoy. Then he looked at me carefully. Almost studying my face. And asked something that made absolutely no sense. What year is it? The man on the bench slowly stood up. He moved calmly. Almost too calmly. Like he had all the time in the world. For a moment he just looked at me. Studying my face. And the longer he looked, the stranger the situation felt. Because there was no surprise in his eyes. None at all. Like strangers arriving in the middle of the night was something that happened here all the time. Then he spoke again. Tu откуда? Where are you from? His voice was rough. Old. Like someone who had lived in that village his entire life. I hesitated. Something about the situation made it difficult to answer simple questions. But eventually I said the name of the nearest city. The old man frowned slightly. Then he shook his head. Slowly. Almost confused. I don't know that place. That was the first moment something truly strange happened. Because the city I mentioned was less than 80 kilometers away. Even the smallest villages usually knew it. But this man didn't. He just kept looking at me. Then he asked another question. A very simple one. What year is it? For a second I thought I misunderstood him. But the man repeated the question. Calmly. What year is it now? I answered automatically. 2024. The old man stared at me. Longer this time. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just a quiet, dry laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when a child says something ridiculous. You're joking. I shook my head. No. The man looked at the cigarette in his hand. Then back at me. And finally said something that made the air feel suddenly colder. It's 1993. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy. Almost uncomfortable. Then I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow footsteps on gravel. I turned around. 2 more people were walking toward us from the street. A woman. And a younger man. Both of them stopped a few meters away. Watching. Listening. The old man looked at them. Then pointed at me. This man says it's 2024. The younger man smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they think someone is confused. Or drunk. That's impossible, he said. No one here would believe that. The woman crossed her arms. Then she looked directly at me. Are you sure you're feeling all right? That was when something inside me shifted. Because suddenly the situation didn't feel like a joke anymore. They weren't pretending. They genuinely believed what they were saying. Which meant one of 2 things. Either they were lying. Or they truly believed it was still 1993. And both possibilities were disturbing. But the next thing the old man said made the situation even stranger. He pointed at my car. That machine of yours. What is it? For a second, I didn't understand the question. But then I realized something. The car. My car. It looked completely normal to me. But to them, it might not. Because my car was built in 2021. And if they believed it was 1993, then what they were seeing must have looked very different. The younger man walked slowly toward the car, examining it, running his hand along the door. Then he stepped back. That's not a car I've ever seen before. The woman nodded slowly. Neither have I. The old man was still watching me. Carefully. Almost suspiciously. And that was when I noticed something else. Something I should have noticed the moment I entered the village. Their clothes. Old. Very old. Not dirty. Not worn out. Just out of time. Like they had stepped out of an old photograph. And suddenly the clocks in the windows made more sense. 11:42. Every single one. Frozen. Like time had stopped. And for the first time since entering the village, a truly disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if they were right? What if this place was still in 1993? But that idea fell apart almost immediately. Because right at that moment, through the open window of one of the houses, I saw something impossible. A flat-screen television. Modern. Thin. At least 10 years newer than anything from the 90s. And that meant one thing. Something in this village was lying. But the question was, what exactly? And more importantly, why? The 3 villagers were still watching me. Quietly. Carefully. Almost like they were trying to understand something about me. But the longer we stood there, the stranger the whole situation felt. Because none of them looked surprised. Not confused. Not scared. Just curious. Like I was the strange one. Not them. The old man noticed where I was looking. At the house with the television. Then he spoke again. You can look inside if you want. His voice was calm. Too calm. Almost inviting. For a moment I hesitated. Something about entering that house felt like a mistake. The kind of mistake you realize too late. But curiosity won again. And I slowly walked toward the door. The wood creaked slightly as I pushed it open. Inside the house it was warmer. Dim light filled the small living room. Old furniture. A wooden table. A couch near the wall. Everything looked ordinary. But something about the room still felt wrong. Almost like time had stopped there too. I stepped inside. The villagers remained outside. Watching. Waiting. I don't know why that detail made me uneasy. But it did. Because none of them followed me. Not even the old man. They simply stood there. Silent. Like they already knew what I would find inside. I walked toward the television. And looked closer. It was modern. A flat screen. At least from the last decade. Which made absolutely no sense. Because if this village truly believed it was 1993, then this television should not exist. Not here. Not in this house. And then I noticed something else. A phone. Lying on the table. A smartphone. Black. Thin. Modern. I picked it up slowly. The screen turned on immediately. No lock screen. No notifications. Just one photo. For a second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But then my stomach dropped. Because the photo showed the village street outside. The same street I had just driven through. The same houses. The same bench. And in the middle of the road, someone was standing, looking toward the camera. It was me, standing in the village. Exactly where I had parked my car. But that photo couldn't exist. Because I had never taken it. And I had never seen anyone holding a phone. I stared at the screen, trying to understand. Trying to find a logical explanation. But the longer I looked, the worse the feeling became. Because there was something else in that photo. Something I hadn't noticed at first. Behind me, in the darkness between the houses, there were people standing there. A lot of them, perfectly still, watching, dozens of figures. But the strangest part was their faces, or rather, the lack of them. Because when I zoomed in on the photo, every single face was blurred, completely. Not like motion blur, not like bad focus. Just gone. Like the camera refused to capture them. A cold wave ran through my body. And for the first time since entering that village, I felt real fear. Because there was only one explanation left. That photo was taken before I entered the house. Before I even saw the phone. Which meant something impossible had happened. Someone, or something, had taken that picture. And they had taken it from behind me. Very close behind me. I slowly turned around. The room was empty. But the front door was still open. And outside, the villagers were still standing there. Watching. Exactly where they had been before. Completely still. And suddenly I realized something that made the situation even worse. None of them had moved. Not once. Not a single step. Since I entered the house. Which meant one terrifying possibility remained. Whoever took that photo was not standing outside. They were inside the house with me. And that was when I heard it. A quiet sound. Right behind me. A single step. On the wooden floor. The sound behind me was quiet. Almost too quiet. Just a single step. On the wooden floor. Slow. Careful. For a moment I froze. Because the sound was very close. Closer than it should have been. The kind of distance where you can almost feel someone's presence behind your back. But the strange part was, I hadn't heard anyone enter the house. The door was still open. And the villagers were outside. Watching. Exactly where they had been before. I slowly turned my head. Just enough to glance over my shoulder. Nothing. The room behind me was empty. Completely empty. The wooden floor. The old couch. The window. No one there. For a second, I almost convinced myself that I imagined it. That it was just the house settling. Old would sometimes make strange sounds. But then it happened again. Another step. Closer this time. Much closer. And now there was no doubt. Someone was inside the house with me. My heart started beating faster. I turned around completely. The room was still empty. But the air felt different now. Heavier. Like the space around me had suddenly become smaller. Then something else happened. The phone in my hand flickered. The screen turned black. Then the photo appeared again. But it wasn't the same photo anymore. Because now, the figures behind me were closer. Much closer. In the first photo, they were standing between the houses. But now they were almost at the edge of the road. And one of them was standing directly behind me. I could see the outline of a person. Tall. Still. Watching. But the face was still missing. Just a blurred shape where a face should be. My stomach dropped. Because that meant something impossible. The photo was changing. Updating. Like a live camera. But that couldn't be true. There was no camera. No signal. No internet. Nothing. And yet the image kept changing. Slowly. One of the figures stepped closer. Then another. Then another. I looked at the doorway. The villagers outside were still standing there. But something about them was different now. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking past me. Into the house. Their faces were pale. Tense. Almost afraid. The old man took a small step backward. And that was the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Then he whispered something. Very quietly. So quietly, I almost didn't hear it. You shouldn't have gone inside. The words sent a cold wave through my body. Because the way he said it sounded like a warning. Not a statement. A warning. Then something moved again behind me. This time louder. A clear step. Right on the wooden floor. So close I could feel the vibration through my shoes. And that was when I realized something truly terrifying. The footsteps weren't coming from the room behind me. They were coming from somewhere else. Somewhere deeper in the house. A place I hadn't seen yet. A hallway. A dark hallway leading further inside. And from that hallway, something was slowly walking toward me. The hallway behind me was completely dark. Not the kind of darkness you see at night. This one felt deeper. Like the light from the living room refused to enter it. For a moment I just stood there, listening. The villagers outside were suddenly very quiet. Too quiet. Even the old man wasn't speaking anymore. Then the footsteps stopped. Somewhere inside that hallway. And the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Because when something is moving, at least you know where it is. But when it stops, you don't know where it might appear next. I slowly stepped backward, away from the hallway. The phone in my hand vibrated slightly. I looked down. The photo had changed again. The figures behind me were even closer now. So close that one of them was almost touching my shoulder. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. The figures in the photo were not following me. They were approaching the house. The same house I was standing in. I looked toward the door. The villagers outside had moved. Not much. Just a little. But now they were standing farther away from the entrance. Almost like they didn't want to be near the house anymore. The old man was staring directly at the hallway behind me. His face pale. His eyes wide. Then he whispered something again. It's awake. The words barely reached me. but they were enough to send a chill through my body, because the way he said them sounded like he wasn't talking about a person. He was talking about something else, something older, something that lived inside the village. And that was when the lights in the house suddenly flickered. Once, twice, then they went out completely. The room fell into darkness. For a moment I couldn't see anything. Then the lights outside the houses began turning off, one by one, across the entire street. Window after window went dark, until the whole village was swallowed by night. And in that darkness, I heard the footsteps again. But this time, they were no longer inside the hallway. They were standing right behind me. The darkness inside the house lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The kind of darkness where your mind starts imagining things, where every shadow feels alive. Then the lights came back. Suddenly, bright, cold, almost unnatural. For a moment I couldn't move, because something outside had changed. The villagers were gone. The old man, the woman, the younger man. All three of them had been standing outside the door just seconds ago, watching, waiting. And now, the street was empty, completely empty. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the same quiet village street, like they had never been there at all. A cold feeling spread through my chest, because people don't just disappear like that. Not silently, not instantly, unless something made them leave, or something made them hide. And suddenly I realized something else. The houses around me were dark now. Every single window, the lights that had been glowing only moments ago, were gone. The entire village had fallen silent again. But this silence felt different. Before it had felt empty. Now it felt watchful, like the village itself was paying attention. The phone vibrated again. I looked down slowly. The photo had changed. This time the figures behind me were no longer blurry shapes in the distance. They were standing in the street, right where the villagers had been, perfectly still, facing the house, facing me. And for the first time, some of them had faces. But those faces were wrong. Not human. Stretched. Distorted. Almost like unfinished masks. And that was when I heard something outside. Movement. Very slow movement. Right in the street. I stepped toward the door. Carefully. Almost afraid to look. But curiosity pulled me forward again. I leaned slightly outside. And the moment I did, my heart stopped. Because the street was no longer empty. Dozens of figures were standing there now. Exactly where the villagers had been moments ago. Tall. Thin. Completely still. Watching the house. Watching me. And none of them were there before the lights went out. Which meant one terrifying thing. They had arrived in complete silence, while I was inside the house. And the worst part was, they weren't moving, not even breathing, just standing there, like they had been waiting for me to look outside. The figures in the street didn't move. Not at first. They just stood there, perfectly still, watching the house, watching me. The longer I looked at them, the more wrong they seemed. Their bodies were too thin, too tall, their heads slightly tilted, almost like they were trying to understand something about me. Or maybe, remember something. I stepped back from the doorway. Slowly, carefully, because every instinct in my body was screaming the same thing. Leave. Now. I turned toward the street. My car was still parked where I left it, about 20 meters away, between the houses. The distance suddenly felt much longer, because to reach the car, I would have to walk directly past those figures. And they were standing exactly in the middle of the road, blocking the way. But staying inside the house didn't feel safer. If anything, it felt worse. The hallway behind me was still dark, still silent. And whatever had been walking inside the house earlier had not left, which meant I had only one choice. I had to run. I took a deep breath, then stepped outside. The cold night air hit my face immediately. The figures didn't react. Not when I stepped onto the street. Not when I started walking toward the car. But something about the silence changed. The moment I left the house, the village felt different. Almost like it was watching more closely now. Every step echoed across the empty street. Too loud. Too clear. I kept my eyes on the car, trying not to look at the figures, trying not to notice how close they were. But curiosity pulled my gaze anyway. And when I finally looked at one of them, my stomach twisted, because the face wasn't just distorted. It was unfinished, like someone had tried to create a human face, and stopped halfway through. The eyes were there, but empty, dark, almost like holes. I forced myself to keep walking. 10 meters. 5 meters. The car was right there. The moment my hand touched the door handle, something moved. A small movement. Behind me. I froze, because I knew immediately what had happened. The figures were no longer perfectly still. They were getting closer. Slowly. Very slowly. But they were moving. The car door opened with a loud metallic click. Too loud. The sound echoed across the empty street. For a moment I was afraid that the figures would react immediately. But they didn't. Not yet. They were still moving slowly behind me, almost gliding across the road. I quickly got inside the car and slammed the door. The moment the door closed, something strange happened. The silence outside became even deeper, like the car itself had cut me off from the village. For a second I just sat there, breathing, trying to calm down. Then I looked through the windshield. The figures were closer now, much closer, still walking, still silent, and the way they moved felt wrong. Not like normal walking. Their legs moved, but their bodies didn't sway, almost like something was pulling them forward. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. The engine didn't start, just a dry clicking sound. My stomach tightened immediately, because the car had worked perfectly all night. Until now. I tried again. The same sound. Click, click, click. The figures were halfway across the street now. Still approaching. Still watching. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Calm down. Think. Cars don't just stop working without a reason. There had to be a reason. But the moment I looked at the dashboard, my heart sank, because the clock on the dashboard showed a time that made no sense. 11:42. The same time as every clock in the village. And suddenly something terrifying clicked in my mind. The clocks in the village weren't broken. They weren't frozen. They were all synchronized. Every single one of them, including the clock in my car, which meant something impossible had just happened. The moment I entered the village, time had stopped. The realization hit me like cold water. Time had stopped. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally. Every clock in the village showed the same moment. 11:42. And now, so did the clock in my car, which meant something impossible was happening, something that shouldn't exist. The figures outside were still moving, slowly, but steadily, and suddenly I understood something else. They were not affected by whatever had stopped time. They were moving freely, while everything else remained frozen. The trees weren't moving. The fog hung in the air like a photograph. Even the dust on the road seemed perfectly still, but the figures kept coming. Step, 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 closer, closer, closer. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the key again. This time the engine responded, weakly, a low grinding sound, but not enough to start. I tried again. The figures were now only a few meters away, close enough for me to see their faces clearly, or what should have been faces, because the closer they came, the more disturbing the details became. Their skin looked smooth, too smooth, almost like wax, and their eyes were completely black, not dark, not shadowed, just empty black holes. Watching, always watching. One of them reached the front of the car. It stopped directly in front of the headlights. The light illuminated its face completely, and that's when I realized something truly horrifying. The face wasn't unfinished. It was blank, completely blank. No mouth, no nose, just the shape of a head, and two dark holes where eyes should be. Then the engine suddenly started. Loud, violent. The sound shattered the unnatural silence of the village. For the first time the figures reacted. Not with fear, not with surprise. They tilted their heads, all at the same time, like they were listening to the engine, studying it, understanding it. And then, they began moving faster. The engine roared suddenly. Loud, violent. The sound shattered the unnatural silence of the village. For the first time since I arrived, something changed. The figures reacted. Not with fear, not with panic. They tilted their heads, all at the same time, like they were studying the sound, listening carefully, almost like they had never heard an engine before. That thought sent a cold wave through my body, because if they didn't recognize the sound of a car, then what exactly were they? I pressed the accelerator. The car moved forward, slowly at first. One of the figures was still standing directly in front of the headlights, perfectly still, watching. For a split second I hesitated, but then instinct took over. I drove straight toward it. The figure didn't step aside, not even at the last moment, but just before the car reached it. Something impossible happened. The figure simply shifted, not stepping, not jumping, just sliding sideways through the light, like a shadow moving across the ground. And suddenly the road ahead was clear. I didn't wait. I slammed the accelerator. The car rushed forward through the narrow village street, past the empty houses, past the dark windows, past the place where the villagers had been standing. But the strangest part was what happened behind me. Because when I looked in the rearview mirror, the figures weren't chasing the car. They weren't running. They weren't even walking faster. They were just standing there, watching me leave. And somehow, that felt even worse. Because it looked like they knew something I didn't. And they were completely certain that I wasn't going to escape. The village disappeared behind me faster than I expected. The narrow street ended suddenly, and the road returned to the forest. The headlights cut through the fog again. Tall trees surrounded the road on both sides. For a moment, I felt relief. Real relief. Because the figures were gone. The houses were gone. The strange village was behind me. But that feeling didn't last long. Because after a few seconds, I realized something strange. The forest looked different now. The road felt longer than before. And the fog was thicker. Much thicker. I glanced at the GPS screen. The map had returned. But it didn't show a road. not the one I was driving on. In fact, it didn't show anything at all, just a blank gray space, like the entire forest had been erased. That made my hands tighten on the steering wheel, because I knew one thing for certain. The road I was driving on had existed before. I had just used it to reach the village. But now, according to the GPS, that road didn't exist anymore. Then something moved between the trees. A shadow. Fast. Gone before I could focus on it. I told myself it was just the branches moving in the fog. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because a few seconds later, another shadow crossed the headlights. This one slower, taller, almost human. I forced myself to keep driving. Faster now. The engine hummed steadily. The forest rushed past on both sides. But the feeling that something was following me didn't disappear. If anything, it became stronger. Then I saw it clearly. Between the trees on the left side of the road, a figure, tall, thin, standing perfectly still, watching the car pass. And as I drove past it, another figure appeared on the right side of the road. Then another, and another. They weren't chasing the car. They weren't running. They were just standing there, between the trees, perfectly spaced apart, watching, waiting. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. The figures hadn't been in the village. The village had been inside their forest. The forest road stretched endlessly ahead of me. The headlights illuminated the same narrow path. The same trees. The same fog. Everything looked identical. Too identical. After several minutes I began to notice something disturbing. The road wasn't changing. Normally when you drive through a forest, the scenery slowly shifts. Different trees, different curves, different shadows. But here, everything looked the same. Like the road was repeating itself. I checked the rearview mirror. Just darkness behind me. Nothing else. Then I glanced back at the GPS. Still blank. No road. No forest. No location. Just an empty gray space. Like the system refused to acknowledge that I existed there. That thought made my chest tighten. Because it meant something impossible. Either the GPS was completely broken, or the place I was driving through was not supposed to exist. Then the road began to curve slightly. To the right. I slowed down instinctively. Something about that curve felt familiar. Too familiar. The trees on the left side leaned inward. Just like before. The fog became thicker again. Just like before. And then I saw something ahead. A wooden sign. Old. Leaning slightly to the side. My stomach dropped immediately. Because I had seen that sign already. Only once before. At the beginning of the road. The same faded letters. The same broken wood. Karskui, 3 kilometers. Which meant something impossible. I had been driving away from the village for at least 10 minutes. But the road had brought me back. To the exact same place. The same sign. The same road. The same forest. And suddenly, I understood the real horror of the situation. The forest wasn't letting me leave. I stared at the wooden sign for several seconds. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. Because it meant only one thing. I had been driving in a circle. But that wasn't possible. I had driven straight the entire time. No turns. No crossroads. Nothing. Just a narrow forest road. And yet, the same sign stood in front of me again. Karskui, 3 kilometers. The fog around the road seemed thicker now. Almost like the forest was closing in. For a moment I considered turning around again. But a disturbing thought stopped me. If the road behind me led back here, then turning around would change nothing. The forest had already decided where I was going. And the answer was obvious. Back to the village. I slowly drove forward. The engine humming steadily now. The road felt shorter this time. Much shorter. Too short. Because after only a minute, I saw the lights again. But something was different now. Very different. The village ahead looked darker. The warm yellow lights were gone. Only a few dim windows glowed weakly. The houses looked older somehow. Almost abandoned. Like decades had passed in just a few minutes. I drove slowly into the street again. My headlights swept across the wooden houses. Across the empty road. Across the bench where the old man had been sitting earlier. But now, the bench was broken. Split down the middle. Like it had been rotting there for years. The fences around the houses leaned at strange angles. Some of the windows were shattered. The entire village looked dead. And the worst part was the silence. Before the village had felt strange. Now it felt wrong. Like something had drained the life out of it. I stopped the car in the middle of the road. My headlights illuminated the street ahead. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the dust. Dozens of them. Fresh. Leading from the forest. Straight into the village. And every single set of footprints was heading toward the same place. The house I had entered earlier. The footprints in the dust led directly toward the house. The same house I had entered earlier. For several seconds I just sat in the car, staring at the trail, trying to convince myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the villagers had returned. Maybe they had simply left the street earlier. But something about the footprints felt wrong. They were too deep, too uneven. almost like whoever made them had been dragging their feet through the dirt. And there were too many of them. Far too many. Dozens of footprints, all leading toward the same door. My headlights illuminated the entrance of the house. The door was open, completely open, but I clearly remembered closing it before I left. That detail alone made my stomach tighten, because doors don't open by themselves. Not like that. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was overwhelming. For a moment, the forest seemed to breathe around the village. Then I stepped out of the car. The cold air felt sharper now, colder than before. The street remained empty, but the feeling of being watched had returned, stronger than ever. I slowly walked toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last. The footprints became clearer as I approached. Some of them were enormous, longer than a normal human foot. Others were strangely thin, almost like claw marks in the dirt. And all of them disappeared through the doorway. The darkness inside the house looked deeper now, thicker, like a black fog filling the hallway. But there was something else too. A faint light, coming from somewhere inside. Not the living room. Further back, deeper in the house. I stopped at the doorway, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, a sound. Very quiet. Almost like whispering. More than one voice. Soft. Unclear. But definitely there. Something was inside the house. And it wasn't alone. The whispering inside the house continued. Soft. Constant. Almost like many voices speaking at the same time. I stood in the doorway for several seconds. Listening. Trying to understand what they were saying. But the words made no sense. They overlapped. Blended together. Like fragments of broken sentences. Something deep inside me was screaming to leave. To get back in the car. To drive away. But another feeling pushed me forward. The need to understand. The need to see what was inside. I stepped over the threshold. The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight. The whispering stopped immediately. Completely. The silence that followed was terrifying. Because it meant one thing. Whatever had been speaking knew I was there now. The dim light I had seen earlier flickered somewhere deeper in the house. I moved slowly through the living room. The same furniture was still there. The same table. The same couch. But everything felt colder. Almost abandoned. Then I reached the hallway. The dark hallway I had avoided earlier. The faint light was coming from the far end. A single doorway. Half open. I took another step. The floor creaked again. Then another step. And suddenly, I saw them. Standing inside the room. Dozens of figures. Completely still. Facing the doorway. Facing me. For a moment my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. Because they looked exactly like the villagers from before. The old man. The woman. The younger man. And many others I hadn't seen earlier. But something about them was wrong. Very wrong. The longer I stared, the more disturbing the details became. Their bodies were stiff. Unnatural. Almost like mannequins standing upright. And their faces were gone. Completely smooth. Like blank masks where human features should have been. And every single one of them was staring directly at me. For several seconds no one moved. The figures stood perfectly still inside the room. Dozens of blank faces pointed toward the doorway. Toward me. The silence inside the house was unbearable. Heavy. Almost suffocating. I couldn't even hear my own breathing anymore. Only the faint creaking of the old wooden floor beneath my feet. Then something changed. Very slowly. Almost imperceptibly. One of the figures tilted its head. Just slightly. The movement was small. But it broke the unnatural stillness of the room. A second later, another figure moved. Then another. And suddenly every single one of them began to shift. Not walking. Not stepping. Just adjusting their bodies. Like statues coming to life. My chest tightened instantly. Because the way they moved felt wrong. Their joints bent too slowly. Too smoothly. Almost like they weren't used to moving. Like something inside them was learning how to control their bodies. Then one of them took a step forward. The sound of the foot touching the wooden floor echoed loudly through the room. Another step followed. Then another. Soon several figures were moving. Slowly. Deliberately. All toward the doorway. All toward me. And the worst part was, they were perfectly synchronized. Every step happened at the same time. Like dozens of bodies controlled by a single mind. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow. Too small. I took a step backward. Then another. The figures continued approaching. Their blank faces never turning away. Always looking straight at me. Then I heard something behind me. A sound from outside the house. Footsteps. More footsteps. Dozens of them. Coming from the street. And suddenly the true horror of the situation became clear. The figures inside the house were not the only ones. The entire village was coming. The figures inside the room kept moving closer. Step by step. Perfectly synchronized. Their blank faces never leaving mine. And the footsteps outside the house were getting louder. Many more of them. Coming from every direction. That was the moment instinct took over. I turned and ran. The wooden floor thundered beneath my feet as I rushed down the hallway. Behind me, I heard the movement accelerate. Dozens of footsteps. No longer slow. No longer careful. They were coming. Fast. I burst through the front door and into the cold night air. The village street was no longer empty. Figures stood everywhere now. Between the houses. In the road. Near the fences. All facing the house. All turning toward me at the exact same moment. For a split second I froze. Because there were far more of them than before. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Everywhere I looked. There was another figure. Another blank face. Watching. But the moment they began to move, my body reacted before my mind could. I sprinted toward the car. The gravel crunched violently under my shoes. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the dead village. I could hear movement behind me. Hundreds of footsteps now. Not running, but moving faster than before. The distance to the car suddenly felt enormous. Every step felt too slow, too heavy. Then something grabbed my jacket. For a split second my heart stopped. I twisted violently and pulled free. One of the figures had reached the edge of the road. Its blank face inches from mine. The empty black eyes staring straight into me. I shoved it away instinctively. The body moved strangely. Too light. Too loose. Like pushing a mannequin. I didn't stop running. The car was only a few meters away now. My hands shook as I grabbed the door handle. The door opened. I threw myself inside. And slammed it shut. At the exact moment the first figure reached the car. The moment the car door slammed shut, everything outside went silent again. The first figure stood only a meter away from the window. Its blank face pressed into the headlights. The smooth surface of its skin reflected the light strangely, almost like polished wax. More figures were approaching from every direction. From between the houses. From the street. From the darkness beyond the fences. They moved slowly. But there were too many of them. Far too many. Within seconds they surrounded the car completely. Dozens of bodies. Standing shoulder to shoulder. Watching. Always watching. My breathing became shallow. Fast. The inside of the car suddenly felt very small. Very fragile. Like a thin metal shell surrounded by something ancient. Something patient. I grabbed the steering wheel and forced myself to focus. Just drive. Just leave. I turned the key. The engine coughed weakly. But didn't start. My stomach dropped instantly. Because I knew what that meant. The car had started earlier. But now, the same thing was happening again. Something here didn't want me to leave. I tried again. The engine struggled. A low grinding sound filled the cabin. The figures outside leaned closer. Not touching the car. Just watching. Their black eyes reflecting in the windshield. Then something happened that made the situation even worse. One of the figures slowly lifted its hand. The fingers were long. Too long. And it placed the palm gently against the glass. The sound was soft. Almost gentle. But the effect on me was immediate. My entire body tensed. Because the hand left something behind on the window. A mark. Like frost spreading across the glass. Thin white lines branching outward from the point of contact. And suddenly the temperature inside the car began to drop. I could see my breath now. The figures outside didn't move. But their presence felt heavier. Stronger. Almost like they were draining the warmth from the air. And that was when I realized something terrifying. They weren't trying to break into the car. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. Patiently. For something else to happen. The frost on the window kept spreading. Thin white lines crawling slowly across the glass. Like cracks forming in ice. My breath fogged the windshield as the temperature inside the car continued to drop. Outside, the figures didn't move. They just stood there, perfectly still, watching, waiting. And suddenly I understood something that made the fear even worse. They weren't trying to stop me. They weren't attacking the car. They were simply waiting. Like they already knew what was going to happen. That realization changed something inside me. Because if they were waiting, then whatever came next was already inevitable. And sitting in the car wasn't going to save me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The engine still hadn't started. But I knew I couldn't keep waiting. The frost on the window had reached the edges now. Soon I wouldn't be able to see the road at all. I turned the key again. The engine groaned. Coughed. Then suddenly roared to life. Loud. Violent. The sound exploded through the silent village. For the first time, the figures reacted. Not with fear. Not with panic. They stepped aside. Slowly. Creating a narrow path through the crowd. A straight path down the center of the road. My heart pounded violently. Because the movement was too deliberate. Too organized. Almost like they had planned it. Like they wanted me to drive through them. And that thought was even more terrifying than if they had tried to stop me. But I didn't have a choice. I pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward. The figures on both sides turned their heads as I passed. Their empty black eyes following the movement of the car. Watching. Always watching. And for a moment I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the road ahead was clear. The forest waited beyond the village. Dark. Silent. But open. And I drove straight toward it. Without looking back. The forest swallowed the village behind me. Within seconds, the houses disappeared into the darkness. The narrow road stretched ahead through the trees. My headlights cut through the fog again, and for the first time in a long while, the road felt real, normal. The engine roared steadily as I pressed the accelerator harder. I didn't want to slow down, not even for a second, because somewhere deep inside I felt it. If I stopped, even for a moment, the forest might not let me leave again. The trees rushed past on both sides of the car, tall black shapes flashing through the headlights. The fog slowly began to thin. That alone gave me hope, because the thicker the fog had been, the closer I had been to the village. But something still felt wrong, very wrong, because the forest seemed too quiet. Even now, no wind, no insects, no animals, nothing, just the engine of the car cutting through the night. I forced myself to glance in the rearview mirror. Just once. The road behind me was empty, completely empty. No figures, no movement, nothing following the car. For several seconds I just stared, waiting, expecting something to appear in the darkness. But nothing did. And slowly, very slowly, a strange feeling replaced the fear. Relief. Maybe I had actually escaped. Maybe the forest had finally released me. Maybe the nightmare was over. But then the GPS screen flickered, and something appeared on the map. A single thin line. A road, leading away from the forest, leading back toward the highway. My chest tightened with sudden hope. I followed the road exactly as the screen showed. Every turn, every curve, and after several minutes, I finally saw it. Far ahead, through the thinning fog, two distant lights, bright white, moving slowly toward me. Headlights. Another car. The highway. The headlights ahead grew brighter as I drove closer. Another car. A real car. Driving along the highway. For a moment the sight almost felt unreal. After everything that had happened in the forest, the idea of another person being nearby felt strange. Almost impossible. But the road widened suddenly. The narrow forest path ended, and the asphalt of the highway appeared beneath my wheels. The moment the tires touched the smooth road, something inside my chest loosened, like the tension that had been building for the past hour finally released. I slowed down slightly. The other car passed me without stopping. Its headlights flashed across my windshield. For a split second, I saw the driver inside. A normal man, just driving through the night, completely unaware of the nightmare hidden inside the forest behind me. The moment his car disappeared down the road, the forest suddenly felt smaller, less threatening, like whatever had happened there couldn't reach beyond the trees. I drove for several more minutes before finally pulling the car to the side of the highway. My hands were still shaking. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled down. For a moment, I simply sat there, trying to process everything. The village, the figures, the house, the blank faces. None of it felt real anymore, like a nightmare fading after waking up. Then I remembered something. The phone, the one I had picked up inside the house. I reached into my jacket pocket slowly. The device was still there, cold, silent. I turned the screen on. The same photo appeared again. The village street, the car, myself standing in the middle of the road, and the figures behind me. But something had changed, something that made my stomach tighten again, because the figures were closer now, much closer, and one of them was standing directly behind the camera. The phone screen glowed faintly in the darkness of the car. I stared at the image for several seconds, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But the longer I looked, the more obvious it became. The figures in the photo had moved. When I first saw the picture inside the house, they had been standing between the buildings, far away, almost hidden in the shadows. But now they were closer, standing near the road, watching the car, watching me. My heart started beating faster again, because photos don't change. Not like that, not on their own. I zoomed in slowly, my fingers trembling slightly. The image sharpened, and the details became clearer. The figures were taller than I remembered, their bodies thin, almost unnatural, and their faces were still empty, smooth, featureless, like unfinished masks. Then I noticed something else, something I hadn't seen before. There were footprints in the dirt behind the figures, fresh ones, leading out of the village, leading into the forest. And suddenly a horrible thought crossed my mind. What if the figures weren't standing still anymore? What if they had already left the village? The cold feeling returned instantly, because if the photo was still updating, then it meant something terrifying. The phone was still connected to whatever was happening inside that forest. I looked up from the screen slowly. The highway stretched empty in both directions, just darkness, and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. For several seconds nothing happened. Then the phone vibrated again, a quiet buzz in my hand. The screen flickered, the image refreshed, and when it appeared again, the figures were no longer in the village. They were standing at the edge of the forest, facing the road, facing me. The image on the phone stayed on the screen for a long time. The figures standing at the edge of the forest, facing the road, facing me. For several minutes, I simply stared at the photo, trying to convince myself that the image wasn't changing anymore. Eventually, the screen went dark. The battery indicator blinked once. Then the phone shut down completely. I sat there for a while longer, listening to the quiet highway, watching the empty road, waiting for something to appear in the darkness. But nothing did. Eventually, I started the car again and drove home. The rest of the drive felt strangely normal. Streetlights, other cars, traffic signs. Everything looked exactly the way it should, which made the memory of the village feel even more unreal, like something from a bad dream. But the feeling didn't disappear. Not completely, because every time I looked in the rearview mirror, a small part of me expected to see something standing in the road behind the car, watching, waiting. Days passed, then weeks. Life slowly returned to normal. Work, friends, routine. I tried not to think about the forest, or the village, or the figures. Eventually, I convinced myself that the whole experience had been some kind of hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, anything except what it had felt like. Then one night, something happened. I woke up suddenly. No reason, no sound, just a strange feeling. The kind of feeling you get when someone is standing nearby in the dark, watching. I sat up slowly. The room was quiet, completely quiet. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window. Then I noticed something strange on my desk. The phone, the same phone from the house, the one that had shut down on the highway. The screen was on again, and the photo had changed. The phone screen glowed softly on the desk. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, trying to understand how it had turned on. The battery had been completely empty earlier. I had seen it shut down myself, and yet the screen was alive again. The same photo filled the display. The village street, the car, myself standing in the road, and the figures behind me. But they weren't in the forest anymore. My breath caught in my throat, because the background had changed. The trees were gone. The houses were gone. The dirt road was gone. Instead, I recognized the place immediately. It was my street, the one outside my house. The same sidewalk, the same street lamp, the same parked cars along the curb. The figures were standing at the end of the road, exactly where the forest should have been, perfectly still, watching, facing the house, facing my window. My hands trembled as I slowly lifted the phone. The image refreshed again, and this time, the figures were closer, standing halfway down the street now. The same tall bodies, the same blank faces, slowly approaching the house, slowly approaching me. And that was when I understood something truly horrifying. The forest hadn't let me escape. It had followed me home. The phone vibrated again, a quiet pulse in my hand. The image refreshed. The figures had moved again, closer, much closer. Now they were standing directly under the street lamp at the end of the road. The light illuminated their bodies clearly, tall, thin, completely still, and their faces were still blank. Smooth surfaces where human features should have been. My chest tightened painfully, because the distance between them and the house was shrinking. Every time the image updated, they were a few steps closer. Slowly, patiently, like they had all the time in the world. I forced myself to look away from the phone, toward the window. The street outside my house looked normal, quiet, empty, exactly the way it always looked at night. No figures, no movement, just the soft glow of the street lamp outside. For several seconds, I simply watched the empty road, trying to convince myself that the photo was wrong, that whatever had happened in the forest had ended there. Then the phone vibrated again. The image refreshed, and this time, the figures were standing directly in front of my house. The figures stood directly in front of the house now. The image on the phone showed them clearly under the streetlight. Tall, thin, perfectly still, watching the window, watching me. My hands were shaking as I slowly lowered the phone. For a moment, I didn't want to look outside. Because if the street was empty, then the photo was impossible. But if the street wasn't empty, then something far worse was happening. I forced myself to stand. Slowly, carefully. The floor creaked quietly beneath my feet as I walked toward the window. Each step felt heavier than the last. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. I stopped beside the curtain. The streetlight outside cast a pale glow through the fabric. For several seconds I just stood there, trying to gather enough courage to look. Then I slowly pulled the curtain aside. The street was empty, completely empty. No figures, no movement, just the quiet road outside my house. Relief washed through my body instantly. I almost laughed, because the tension of the last hour suddenly felt ridiculous. Maybe the phone had been malfunctioning. Maybe the photo was corrupted. Maybe everything that had happened in the forest had been some kind of hallucination. Then the phone vibrated again, one last time. And when I looked down at the screen, the image had changed. The figures were no longer outside the house. They were inside it, standing directly behind me. For several seconds I couldn't move. The phone screen trembled slightly in my hands. The image was perfectly clear. The room, My room, the desk, the window, everything exactly as it looked around me. Except for one thing. The figures. They were standing directly behind me. Dozens of them. Tall. Silent. Watching. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely breathe. Slowly. Very slowly. I turned my head. The room behind me was empty. Completely empty. No figures. No movement. Nothing. Just the quiet darkness of the room. Relief flooded through my body again. For a moment, I almost dropped the phone. Because the tension was too much. Then I looked back at the screen. The image refreshed again. And this time, the camera angle had changed. It was closer. Much closer. The figures were no longer standing across the room. They were standing right behind me. And in the reflection of the phone screen, I could see something that made my blood run cold. One of them had finally grown a face. And that face was mine. For a long time I sat in the darkness of my room. The phone screen had finally gone black. No more updates. No more vibrations. Just silence. Eventually I convinced myself that nothing had been there. That the forest, the village, the figures, all of it had been some kind of nightmare. Something my mind had created after driving too long through the night. Days passed. Then weeks. Life slowly returned to normal. Work. Friends. Routine. I avoided driving through that forest again. Completely. There were other roads. Longer ones. But safer. And eventually, I stopped thinking about the village entirely. Until one night. Several weeks later. I was sitting in my living room, watching television, when something strange happened. My phone buzzed. Just once. A single notification. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop instantly. Because the notification wasn't from any app. It was from the gallery. The same photo had been updated again. My hands felt cold as I opened it. The image appeared slowly on the screen. The street. My house. The front door. And the figures. But they weren't standing outside anymore. They were standing on the porch, right in front of the door. And the last thing the image showed was one of them reaching for the handle. For several seconds I couldn't move. The image on the phone remained frozen on the screen. The porch. The door. The figures standing outside. Tall. Silent. Waiting. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Slowly I looked toward the front door of the house. The hallway was dark. Quiet. Nothing moved. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the image had to be fake. Some kind of glitch. Some kind of corrupted file. But then the phone vibrated again. A soft buzz. The image refreshed. The figures were closer now. Standing directly in front of the door. One of them had raised its hand. The long pale fingers resting on the door handle. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Then the camera angle changed again. This time the photo was taken from inside the house. From the hallway. Facing the door. Which meant only one thing. The phone wasn't showing the future. It was showing the present. And whoever was taking those photos was already inside my house. For several seconds, I just stared at the screen. The hallway in the image looked exactly like the one behind me. The same walls. The same door. The same dim light from the street lamp outside. My hands were shaking slightly. Because if the photo was showing the present, then someone had to be standing in my house. Right now, I slowly turned my head toward the hallway. The darkness there looked deeper than usual. Thicker. Almost like it was hiding something. But nothing moved. The house remained completely silent. Then the phone vibrated again. One final time. The image refreshed. The door in the photo was open now. And the figures were no longer outside. They were standing in the hallway. Facing the camera. Facing me. And in the last frame of the photo, one of them slowly raised its head, looking directly into the lens. And for the first time, it had a face. I didn't move for several seconds. The image on the phone remained on the screen. The hallway. The figures standing there. Watching. Waiting. My breathing was shallow now. Slow. Careful. Almost afraid to make any sound. Because if the photo was real, then the hallway behind me wasn't empty. I slowly turned my head. The darkness stretched down the corridor. Silent. Still. Nothing moved. Then the phone vibrated again. One last time. The image refreshed. The hallway in the photo was closer now. The camera angle had moved forward. And the figures were gone. Completely gone. Only one shape remained. Standing in the center of the hallway. Facing the camera. Facing me. And in the reflection of the phone screen. I finally understood something. The camera wasn't looking at the figures anymore. It was looking at me. I haven't driven through that forest again. Not once. There are other roads. Longer ones. Safer ones. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is completely quiet, I still hear something in the hallway. Soft footsteps. Slow. Careful. Almost like someone is learning how to walk again. And every time I hear them, my phone screen lights up.